The big question right now in Formula One is actually pretty simple. Is anyone going to stop Mercedes this season? Because once again, after another intense sprint qualifying session, the silver cars are sitting right at the top of the timing screens. And if you're a fan of close championship fights, you might already be feeling a little nervous about what we're seeing so far. Right now, George Russell and the Mercedes-AMG Petronas Formula One team just look incredibly comfortable. The gap this time around was slightly smaller than what we saw earlier in the season, but let's be honest here, it still wasn't exactly close. Russell once again ends the session at the top, and it's starting to feel like we're watching the same story repeat itself every single time the cars hit the track. But here's the thing that makes this session really interesting. The real drama wasn't necessarily happening at the very front, it was happening right behind them, where the rest of the grid is desperately trying to figure out how to close that performance gap. Take Max Verstappen, for example. The reigning champion did not hold back after climbing out of the car. In fact, the frustration from inside the Red Bull racing garage was impossible to miss. According to Max, the car felt almost undrivable at times. The balance was off, the drivability was terrible, and the entire package just wasn't working the way he expected. And when Verstappen says something like that, you know things are serious. On the other side of the story, you've got Lewis Hamilton trying to stay positive inside the Scuderia Ferrari camp. Hamilton actually sounded fairly optimistic after the session. He said the car feels good through the corners, the engineers are doing a strong job, and there are definitely areas where Ferrari can fight. But there's one massive problem that Hamilton didn't try to hide: power. According to him, when the cars hit the straights, the Ferrari simply cannot compete with Mercedes right now. And that's not just a small disadvantage, that's a gap that shows up every single lap, especially when energy deployment and battery management start to matter. And if you watched the timing screens carefully during sprint qualifying, you probably noticed exactly where that difference appears. On corner entry and mid-corner, Ferrari can actually look competitive. But once those cars start accelerating down the straight, the Mercedes power unit just seems to pull away like it has an extra gear. Now here's where things get really interesting, because Ferrari didn't just show up this weekend hoping for the best. They actually brought a very unusual technical upgrade that everyone in the paddock has been talking about, a strange new rear wing design that some people have already started calling the Macarena wing. And yes, it's just as weird as it sounds. In fact, this new design might have already caused one of the biggest moments of the entire session. We're going to break that down in a second, because the way this wing works is unlike anything we've seen recently in Formula One. But before we jump into that, quick question for you. Do you think Mercedes already has this season under control, or do you believe another team will catch them soon? Let me know in the comments and give me a quick yes or no vote. Will anyone beat Mercedes this weekend? And if you enjoy these deep dives into everything happening across the grid, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We're pushing hard toward 3,000 subscribers, and every single subscription helps this channel keep growing. And speaking of support, if you want to give the channel a little extra downforce, you can also hit the super thanks or hype button. Think of it as helping us afford one of those ridiculously expensive Formula One tires, because right now, the budget definitely feels more like a midfield team than a championship contender. Now, let's talk about the Ferrari upgrade that might have just caused chaos in qualifying. Ferrari arrived at this weekend with something that immediately caught everyone's attention in the paddock. It wasn't a new floor, it wasn't a major suspension update, and it definitely wasn't the long-awaited solution to their power deficit. Instead, the team rolled out one of the strangest aerodynamic concepts we've seen in a while. A rear wing design that people have already started calling the Macarena wing. And no, that nickname isn't official, but it perfectly captures how unusual this thing actually is. The idea behind the wing is pretty clever in theory. Instead of behaving like a traditional rear wing flap that simply opens and closes for drag reduction, this design rotates much more aggressively. When it actuates, the entire upper element flips into a dramatically different position, almost like a garage door swinging open. The goal is simple: reduce drag on the straights and gain a noticeable top speed advantage. But here's the catch. When that wing rotates, the aerodynamic load on the rear of the car changes very suddenly, and in Formula One, sudden changes in downforce are never a good thing, especially when the driver is already pushing the car right at the limit. That's exactly why this upgrade raised some eyebrows even before the cars went out on track. The engineers at Scuderia Ferrari knew the concept could work, but they were also aware there were risks. The actuation speed, the reliability of the mechanism, and the stability of the car during braking were all question marks. And during the session, one moment seemed to highlight those concerns perfectly. At one point in qualifying, Lewis Hamilton was charging through the first sector when the rear wing was still in the process of closing just as he hit the brakes. That transition created a massive shift in rear downforce, and suddenly, the back of the Ferrari snapped. The result? A pretty dramatic spin. Fortunately for Hamilton, there was plenty of runoff area, so the incident didn't cause any damage, but it was a clear demonstration of just how sensitive these cars can be when something as critical as aerodynamic balance changes at the wrong moment. And that's why, before sprint qualifying even began, Ferrari made a pretty telling decision. They removed the wing. The team went back to the older, more conventional rear wing configuration because the experimental design simply wasn't ready yet. According to Hamilton, the plan was never really to debut it this early in the season anyway. The original target was a few races down the line, once the engineers had more time to refine the actuation system and make sure the car remained stable during those transitions. In other words, Ferrari might have rushed it. Now, here's the interesting part. Even without the experimental wing, Hamilton actually managed a very solid lap. In fact, he ended up splitting the two McLaren cars and putting himself right in the fight near the front of the grid. That tells us something important. The Ferrari chassis itself might actually be very competitive. Hamilton even admitted after the session that through the corners, the car feels strong. The balance is good, the grip is there, and the drivers can attack the lap with confidence. But the moment the cars reach the long straights, that's where the weakness becomes impossible to hide. Because right now, when the power units start deploying their energy, the Mercedes-AMG Petronas Formula One team package simply pulls away. Hamilton didn't sugarcoat it either. He openly said that when it comes to straight-line power and battery deployment, Ferrari just doesn't have the tools to match Mercedes at the moment. And until that changes, there's only so much the drivers can do, no matter how good the car feels in the corners. So while Ferrari experimented with an aggressive aerodynamic upgrade to gain some speed, the real limitation might still be coming from deeper inside the car, the power unit itself. But just when teams were trying to understand these performance differences, something else happened during qualifying that left a lot of people scratching their heads. Because some of the telemetry data being shown during the session didn't seem to make sense at all. And once fans started looking closely at those numbers, a brand new controversy began to unfold. Before we jump into that mystery, quick question for you. Do you think Ferrari should keep developing that aggressive rear-wing concept, or should they abandon it and focus entirely on fixing their power deficit? Let me know in the comments. Keep the wing or scrap it? And if you're enjoying the breakdown so far, make sure you're subscribed and notifications are turned on. Our goal is to reach 3,000 subscribers, and every new fan joining the channel helps push us closer to that milestone. Also, if you want to give the channel a little extra aero upgrade, you can tap the super thanks or hype button below the video. Think of it like helping the team bolt on a bit more downforce, because covering Formula One sometimes feels as expensive as running a full set of race tires. Now, let's talk about the telemetry controversy that suddenly had fans questioning what they were seeing on screen. Now here's where the story takes a strange turn, because while teams were busy trying to understand why Mercedes-AMG Petronas Formula One team keeps pulling away on the straights, something else caught the attention of fans and analysts watching the timing data: the telemetry graphics. At first glance, everything looked normal. You had the usual comparisons between drivers, throttle traces, braking points, and speed curves. But when people started looking closely at the data from the end of the long straights, something didn't quite add up. In several cases, the speed traces simply stopped changing. The lines flattened out completely, almost as if the cars suddenly stopped accelerating or decelerating. But anyone who understands how Formula One works knows that's not realistic. These cars are constantly gaining or losing speed depending on energy deployment, drag, and braking. So why would the data suddenly show a perfectly flat line? This is where the conversation quickly turned towards something called superclipping, which has become one of the biggest talking points under the new power unit regulations. Here's the simplified explanation. With the current hybrid systems, the battery can only deploy energy for a limited amount of time down a straight. Once that energy runs out, the car suddenly loses electrical assistance, and the acceleration drops dramatically. In other words, the engine starts running out of juice before the end of the straight. When that happens, the car's speed doesn't just plateau, it actually starts to fall off quite aggressively. And that's exactly the kind of moment that could make the racing look a bit awkward. So, when viewers noticed that the telemetry graphics weren't showing those drops in speed, some people began wondering if the data being broadcast was incomplete, glitched, or simply not showing the full picture. For example, in one comparison between George Russell and Lando Norris, the speed traces appeared to level out completely near the end of the straight. According to the graphic, both cars held exactly the same speed for a long stretch of track, which is basically impossible. Cars don't just lock into a perfectly constant speed like that, especially not in Formula One, where battery deployment and drag constantly affect acceleration. So, what's going on here? There are two possibilities. The first is the simplest. It could just be a telemetry glitch. Broadcasting live data from dozens of sensors across 20 cars is incredibly complex, and occasionally the graphics system simply fails to display the full data correctly. But the second possibility is what sparked the debate online. Some fans began wondering whether the broadcast graphics were intentionally smoothing out those speed drops to avoid highlighting how extreme the superclipping effect actually looks on track. Now, to be fair, there's no clear proof of that. It could absolutely just be a technical issue, but the timing of the missing data, right at the point where superclipping becomes most visible, certainly raised a few eyebrows. And this whole conversation leads back to the same underlying reality that teams are dealing with right now. Mercedes appears to have mastered energy deployment better than anyone else. When George Russell reaches the main straight, the car not only hits a high top speed, but it maintains that speed longer before the battery runs out. That means the Mercedes keeps accelerating while others start losing momentum, and over the course of a qualifying lap, that advantage becomes massive. It's one of the main reasons why Mercedes keeps appearing at the top of every session so far this season. But while some teams are struggling with energy deployment, others are dealing with something even more frustrating. A car that simply refuses to behave in the corners. And that's exactly the nightmare scenario Max Verstappen found himself dealing with during this session. Because, according to Max, the Red Bull racing car wasn't just slow, it was undrivable. Before we get into that meltdown from the Red Bull garage, quick question for you. Do you think the strange telemetry graphics were just a glitch? Or do you believe something about the data wasn't being fully shown? Drop your opinion in the comments, glitch or something else. And if you're enjoying the breakdown, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. We're pushing toward 3,000 subscribers, and your support helps this channel keep covering every major story across the Formula One season. Also, if you want to give the channel a little extra performance upgrade, you can tap the super thanks or hype button below the video. Think of it like helping the team recharge the battery before the next straight. Every bit of support helps keep the engine running. Now let's talk about the driver who sounded the most frustrated of anyone after qualifying. And yes, we're talking about Max Verstappen. And if there was one driver who sounded genuinely furious after sprint qualifying, it was Max Verstappen. The frustration coming from the Red Bull racing garage was impossible to miss. Usually, when Max complains about the car, it's tied to a specific issue. Maybe energy deployment, maybe balance in a particular corner. But this time, the criticism was much broader. According to Verstappen, the entire car just felt wrong. He described the drivability as horrendous, complaining about the way the car behaved through the corners, the lack of traction, and even the upshifts during acceleration. At one point over the radio, he basically summed up the situation with a brutal assessment. The car was undrivable. And that's not something you hear very often from a driver who has won multiple world championships. The interesting part is that the problem didn't seem to be just one thing. Yes, energy deployment remains a challenge under the current regulations, but Verstappen suggested that the bigger issue was actually the balance of the car itself. If the driver can't carry speed through the corners, everything else starts to fall apart. Think about it like this. If the car struggles for grip, mid-corner, the driver has to fight the steering more. That costs momentum. It also affects how smoothly the driver can get back on the throttle. And if you're not exiting the corners cleanly, your battery management and energy deployment down the straight will also suffer. So what starts as a handling problem quickly becomes a performance problem everywhere else on the track, and that's exactly what seemed to happen during this session. While George Russell once again delivered another incredible lap for Mercedes-AMG Petronas Formula One team, Verstappen found himself buried much further down the order than anyone expected. Meanwhile, Lewis Hamilton managed to extract a very solid performance from the Scuderia Ferrari, putting himself right in the mix behind the Mercedes and McLaren drivers. That result might not look like a victory on paper, but considering Ferrari's power disadvantage on the straights, it's actually a very promising sign. Hamilton even pointed out that in the corners, the Ferrari can genuinely compete. The chassis feels strong, the balance is improving, and there's enough performance there to fight near the front. The only major obstacle remains the same one we talked about earlier: straight-line power. Right now, the Mercedes package simply seems to deploy its energy more efficiently than anyone else. And until the other teams figure out exactly how they're doing it, that advantage could continue showing up every single qualifying session. Still, the weekend is far from over. Hamilton will be starting close enough to the front that a strong launch could immediately put him in contention. We've already seen how chaotic the opening corners can be this season, and sometimes starting just behind the leaders actually gives drivers a better opportunity to attack. And that's why the sprint start suddenly becomes incredibly important. One good launch, one perfectly timed move into the first corner, and the entire race dynamic could change. So because in Formula One, every tiny advantage counts. Now, tell me your predictions for the sprint, and let's see if anyone can finally stop Mercedes.